Welcome back to Masters of Modern. I am your host, Alex Kessler, here with my co-host, Ben Bateman, and special guest, first time on
What's
the
up,
cast.
guys?
Oh, he's saying hello. Hello, Ben. How are you?
Good. I was just doing a movement. You can keep introducing our guest.
And I might say the last name wrong, but returning first time on the cast, but frequent guest on the Monday Night Commander live stream, we have Braden Bowdish. Welcome to the official MMcast podcast.
Thanks, you killed it. You did the last name correctly, you did the first name correctly.
Well, Braden,
that's like a 1 in 100 shot, kid. Is that the quote?
Dad, I'm a big fan of quoting two things wrongly together. It's a favorite pastime of mine.
If you ever were going to say one thing positive about Alex Kessler, it would be that he is phenomenal when it comes to pronunciation of names, and I think he really showed it in his display of your name perfectly there. So, Alex, way to stick with the program there and make sure you pronounce the name correctly.
Because I'm, for some reason, in all of our content, it has become my job to read things out loud, which was a mistake, but comes with the fact that I'm also the person who's technically running things, which was also maybe a mistake. But here we are, 300 episodes into this podcast. This is episode 301. I'm going to be actually very excited when we get to 310, which is the area code of the city of Los Angeles, the place I grew up, just because you got to represent the 310. Hello, Braden. Welcome.
Hello.
Would you like to tell the people listening whom you are, what content you make, and where they can find you on the internet?
Sure. So I'm Braden. I'm a cEDH content creator, cEDH player, commander player. I've been playing Magic for like the last 5 years or so. I'm also a judge. You can find me online at the cEDHcast on Twitter and YouTube and all the other places. I also get to play Commander with you guys on Mondays sometimes when you have me. So
it's really fun.
It's always a good time.
Yes. We love having you there. It's going to be great to talk to you about specifically cEDH, as it's something that you're very, very good at, and something that was kind of an entry point for me to get into this thing. But what I wanted to shout out really quickly was that, I think I said this last week on the show, but 301 episodes in, 7 years later, broadcasting has become this big part of both of our lives. But I was really just getting into it in 2014. I had never hosted a red carpet. I had never hosted an after show. I had never done a podcast once in my entire life, ever. The first thing I ever did in the world of broadcast at all was the 7th episode of the Masters of Modern podcast, when Alex was generous enough to invite me on as a guest host because Glenn, our 300th episode guest, was about to move because he got hired with Wizards. And it was, the first podcast I'd ever done. And 7 years later, obviously, a lot of you guys know I do quite a bit of that stuff now. And it's just crazy to look back to think that was the beginning and there was no experience. I didn't know any of that stuff. Really, truthfully, you barely did either. I mean, you were seven weeks longer than I was at that point with hosting a podcast.
It's like when you're twins and one's older by 7 weeks. I'm the older sibling, Ben. It's fine.
Yes. And so it's just a special thing to look back and realize now we've done this show for so long and so many great things have come from, the beginning of this and just getting started. And I'm really grateful. I'm very thankful to have everyone who's listening to this, the audience, the YouTube audience, the podcast audience, and so many of you. We've gotten to meet so many of you guys at various events and play against you. And it's just a special experience that I think, we're very lucky to have gotten to have even one person who would ever identify as a fan of something we do. It's a weird feeling, but it's such a cool thing that any one person would ever identify that way, and it's special. So it's worth shouting out.
I agree with everything Ben just said. And on that note, and thank you, just everyone who has been listening all this time. It's been a wild ride. We keep going onward and upward. Also, kind of on that note, thank you, patrons, for making this podcast happen. And if you guys have been listening this whole time and you're not a patron, now's the time to check it out, because there's content there. We do today we did 30 minutes of extra content just for the for patrons. So basically, the raw version of this episode gets posted the day we record it, or within 24 hours of that, because sometimes the internet takes longer than that to upload these long videos, and that gets posted. So you get all the content a week early, and you get a bonus amount of somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes, at least this week, of extra weird content. Today we talked about
Mater from Cars for 30 minutes. We spent 30 minutes talking about Mater from Cars. We all did our best impersonations. We ranked the top 10 Mater scenes in Cars movies.
This is not what happened. We did talk about Mater. We talked about music, Mater, and then movies coming back. And then we talked a little bit about moving into new apartment buildings and stuff like that. So definitely check that out. It's a little bit more of a window into the lives of the people that are on this podcast. Now, today, we're going to talk about a little bit of competitive Magic, and in an interesting window of being cEDH. But I think in general, kind of across the board, I want to have that conversation, including Modern. This podcast has always been really interestingly positioned. I think one of the reasons we were able to become as popular as we were in regards to Modern versus a lot of like pro players who were making Modern content at the time that definitely branched out a little bit was we were always kind of this middle point of casual Modern play. We were never like, this is the decks you have to play. We like always took an eye on card evaluation on a perspective of not why won't this card see play in Modern, but how could this card see play in Modern was kind of always my philosophy, which was like one reviewing a card, one talking about a deck. What are the things that could make it better? What are cards that could be printed that could make it better? What can this work? And so Modern has always been able to be a brewer's paradise in some senses, a place where people can have fun and take those challenges. And then Braden, our guest, and bringing it back because of segues. You're primarily a cEDH content creator, and that's kind of not necessarily the opposite, but in many ways like a similar purpose in its like, we are taking a format that appeals to this one audience and then making content around it that appeals to the other half of the Magic audience. And that's taking a casual format known for playing 7 drops and ramping and everyone kind of just being casual and making it appeal to those competitive players that I mentioned, making it like, what is the, like, let's talk about, deck shells. Let's talk about metagames. Let's talk about how all of these card pieces fit together and really evaluate cards. And like, does this really make the cut, or should these be really considered to be like playable in this version of playing this format? And you were insurmountable in the onboarding process of Ben Bateman into the Commander world. I definitely have like Facebook messages from you being like, this is the deck Ben should play. These are the ways we should do it. This is how we get Ben into Commander, make cEDH content. And so how those two worlds have kind of intermixed, how your philosophy around cEDH has worked, how that community has grown so much over the last 5 years, but especially the last year, definitely significantly.
So I think before, I was going to say really quickly before you go, Braden, I want to jump in just because I think a great place to start this conversation that I do want to throw back to you on this question is that you mentioned, Alex, why this podcast I think was successful and why people paid attention. And I think it's a combination of the fact that we appreciate, which I know you do as well, Braden, we appreciate high level competitive card interaction. So we appreciate when something is low costed or it's powerful. We always have. It's why we liked Modern in the first place. But there's also this feeling, I think, of we don't necessarily have to identify with, you are stupid if you don't play this card. It's like you don't have to play the most powerful thing to be doing it right. You can know what's powerful, you can incorporate it, but it's not a requirement to enjoy a format. So I think the first question that I'd want to ask you, Braden, is that what would you identify if you were going to have to explain it as like, what do you think are the cornerstones of competitive Magic, like high level competitive Magic? What do you think defines it? What are the things that players look for? What do you look for?
That's such a complicated question. Like, it sounds so simple, but I have friends who are Legacy players, and they've been playing Legacy for a really long time. And for those people, when I talk to them about Magic, the things that like they get competitive about are very different from me. I think what comes to me to combine a lot is, and you talked a bit about it, I think during the interview you gave with Gun Jones, that feeling of like you have control over what is coming at you and your opponent. Like there's like a back and forth. I think there's like a sense of control that is lost in multiplayer Commander. And I think for a lot of competitive players, like they love that sense of control. And when you get to like higher power levels of Commander, you get back into that a little bit. Like that kind of force comes back in a bit. Like when you have a meta game, you have commanders that kind of express what they do in the command zone that you can kind of play around. But I think like in a format like Legacy or Modern, like that like back and forth, that like you're like in you're like in a box, right? And that box is like you're trying to like master the realm within that box and trying to like make the correct plays and sequence the correct things in a way that like the influence of your opponent and just that opponent and your decisions And I think for a lot of people, that like optimization of that decision making is like what really drives them.
There's less variables, right? So there's more control, which is why like 1v1 sports or competition of any kind, whether you're talking everything from chess to bowling, or it's all the same thing. If it's like, okay, there's a fixed set of variables, there's what I can do, and there's what my opponent can do to respond. And there's only going to be this one beat where you do your thing and they do their thing.
Yeah.
It's very different from cEDH, right?
Yeah. If you think of all games on a spectrum of control, like where you have chess and checkers at one end, where there's complete control over every decision and all the information is on the table. And then you go like, maybe there's like poker, right? Where there's like hidden information. There's an essence of an amount of randomness, right? And then maybe you go to like Yahtzee or something where like Yahtzee is just full randomness. I think competitive players tend to like, everyone's going to find a place where they have the most amount of fun on that spectrum. But I think a lot of competitive players, they really like to find themselves in the chess and checkers zone. And I think some cEDH players, like from an emotional like perspective, it is kind of nice to not always have to put the blame on yourself entirely, if that makes sense. Like if you're trying to have fun with a game, being able to go like, when you get tilted, being like, oh, it was my opponent's fault. They blew up the Ristic Study instead of the Null Rod when they should have blown up the Null Rod. Like there is like a push and pull there that I think like helps some people play cEDH and like be able to get more out of their games in the long term, even if like it's less competitive or less spiky, I think, in the mentality, if that makes sense.
I think one of the things that's interesting in that world is there is a community in a game of cEDH will work together more that I notice than they do necessarily in a game of regular Commander to find the correct decision. Now this could also just because we are playing generally with content creators. So there is a content creators in general are used to like being educational in the way that they play anything. It's why you get into content creation, especially in a game like Magic. But I do think there's like a conversation when someone's like, okay, they did this. What is the best way for the community of this game to answer this problem? And obviously there is the werewolf mafia aspect, Among Us aspect for all those Zoomers out there. Like the information that people are giving me is what is best for them. And like, I know that they're telling me what is best for them. And so you can extrapolate that information to be like, okay, this is why they are saying that. Oh, they are saying that this is good for them because they have these cards, or they want me to get rid of Rest in Peace because they can go off and use whatever the red enchantment that is basically Yawgmoth's Will, or they can use Yawgmoth's Will for that
Breach.
matter, Underworld Breach, to go off. The larger number of variables that gets added to Commander, that is true of all Commander games. I've found in cEDH the community aspect of working against it adds a new layer to it, but also does limit some of those issues. The other one is there's less like the metagame is more established, and when I say that, like there's less oddballs. It's not like, oh, I can expect this person to be playing Ad Nauseam. That is the most likely card that they're going to be trying to go for here because that is the established thing that's going on here. Demonic Consultation of the Foss is an understood thing. They're playing blue and black. They tutored twice. I can understand what they probably are going for with counter magic backup. They're playing Birthing Pod. I can expect them to be going through a Birthing Pod chain. These are the three main ones that exist. I can, work through what are the best ways and outs that I have to fight against it. So, and that's very competitive 1v1 Magic, right? Like when you play Modern, before I got into Magic content, someone was like, before you do Magic content, you have to be at the point in this format where after someone plays their first land, you know what deck they're playing, right? Like, can you get to that point in this metagame? And cEDH has similar aspects to it, I think, as that does.
It's more like when someone sits down with their commanders, do you have a general idea what they're going for? And I think that's actually like kind of satisfying in a way. Like you don't have to guess based off their lands. Like the commanders are sort of a tell. And I think that's also fun. Like when you sit at a table and you kind of know what everyone's doing, the surprises are bigger, and the way you can kind of strategize around that also, and talk as if the community you kind of mentioned also is fun. That's like when someone plays something and you can kind of go like, hey, they're on this combo. You need to like keep an eye out for that, kind of making them not want to use their interaction on you. Like that's fun. I enjoy that.
I think the value and the weight of metagame information and understanding of a sport or a game or of an interaction is so essential when it comes to drawing people into to really respecting it with that level. Like when you know the metagame in a competitive format, it gives you a sense of respect and it draws you in further. It makes your want and your desire to win and sort of assert that understanding and that knowledge even greater. I think it's one of the things that makes competitive 1v1 Magic and also ultimately CDH so appealing. It's because you do sort of understand the variables, right? Like you mentioned, if chess is the most established, where you know that basically all information, you have perfect information at all times. So it's just this ongoing, incredibly complex math problem. That's less of an appeal for the type of players that I think usually want to win in Magic, because they wouldn't have chosen Magic if that's what they wanted, right? Magic has too much of a randomness to it. It's kind of like you guys know, and I think a lot of people listening know that I do this movie trivia thing. It's the largest movie trivia league in the world, and one of the things that I always talk about is I tell this to the question writers when they write questions that are basically like, what is the name of this character in this movie, right? Or they'll say like, what is the name of the summer camp, right? Something like that, where it's like, unless you know it, you won't know it. If you know it, you absolutely will know it. But they're not going to be able to like run through a Rolodex of guesses that seem logical and be able to wager a guess that might get you there. That's a lot less fun as a player. It's a lot less fun as an audience member watching the show to experience that, versus if they say something like, how many movies directed by this director did this character actor appear in? And then maybe you can be like, okay, well, it's at least kind of guessable. Maybe if I throw out a number, it might be right, even if I don't know. That's better. It's a better way of approaching game design, because it's like now the audience can play along and they can say, okay, even if this person I'm watching doesn't know the correct decision, and if we're going to use this as a metaphor for Magic, even if they don't 100% know what their opponent's going to do, and even if their out's not an easy out, they can still play to this thing that might happen. But if you reach a point in the game where it's like, well, they're dead because they don't have a card that answers this other thing, and now it's a hard lock, that's a lot less fun. So I do think that when it comes to Magic, the thing that makes the competitive environment of it so powerful and so compelling is that there are a number of variables, even in 1v1 play. I mean, even in the highest level 1v1, non-multiplayer games, there's still a level of randomness to what you're going to draw, to what's in your hand. You still can't control all the variables no matter how hard you try. And I think, so cEDH to me is like, it's just the multiplayer version of that idea, because obviously there's more variables, it's less controllable, but everything you're saying, Alex, I agree with, which is like, the sense of a group mind solving a math problem together. For instance, the sequencing of like person does thing. Okay, active player, do you have a thing you can do? No. Okay, next active player, do you have a thing you can do? Yes, I'll do this thing. Okay, back to the first active player. Can you respond to the thing he did, right? Or they did, I apologize. And like, that's such an interesting piece of this. Like that adds so much to cEDH that 1v1 doesn't get.
I had a scenario today where someone had a spell seeker combo they were going through, and I had a bounce spell that put a card on top of their library, and I passed priority, and then the player after me in priority, who would be the last one to get priority before like the effect would resolve, was kind of like tinkering, thinking about whether or not they had something, and I realized they couldn't have an answer in their color combination. I said, hey, can you tap a land so a new round of priority starts? Because if you tap a land, like priority will start over. And so they did. They tapped their land. Priority came back to me, and then I used my bounce spell to solve the problem. That was like really cool. I was like, that was. Yeah. I made a mistake, but we were able to work together so that we didn't lose in that situation despite the mistake.
In many ways, it makes cEDH like a game of rotating archenemy, right? Like it's always a, and that's in essence, that's what regular EDH is as well. But it's always like you are trying to put yourself in. You're either trying to do two things. You're trying to put yourself into a position where you can be the archenemy and people can't stop you anyways, or you're trying to secretly be the archenemy without anyone noticing you've been the archenemy the whole time.
Yeah. So I explained it to Sheldon one time that it's like there's 4 games of 3v1, so like archenemy, and your job is to constantly try to make sure that all the teams you're on are winning, and eventually you just end up winning the most. Like you're just trying to make sure your team, the team that's opposing you of 3 is losing, and the teams that you're on are winning, and then hope you get there for the most part. There's like a lot of games that end up being like that. And again, that's fun. It's like there's different games going on, and you're constant. It's like 3D chess almost, you know?
Right.
When Alex and I play multiplayer together, it's just a rotating game. If it's his turn, then I'm the archenemy, and if it's my turn, then he's the archenemy, and that's just how it goes. Whether there's 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, it's just the same thing every time.
Well, there are two things that happen. One, it's easier to go after each other at this point, at least especially when we have newer guests on, because I don't want to be mean to people that I'm having on as a guest. And so like, if I'm like, I have to attack someone here and my choices are this nice person who I want to be my friend and I'm meeting for the first time, or like this person who I want to be having a good time, or Ben, who is legally required to be here every Monday. And so I can make as miserable as I possibly could want and not lose anything. And
it gets spicy sometimes though. But ultimately the thing is, I think it's such an indicative piece of why regular EDH is going to be ultimately different than cEDH, because I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to attack you, Alex, and go after you to get a laugh and for the audience to have a good time, no matter what it is you're playing or what you're doing, far more than I would be if I'm like, okay, all 4 people here could win on their turn. So like, I'm going to make the optimal play so that I have the most optionality, so that I have the most responses available to me. I don't care about your life total because I'm probably not trying to attack to kill you with damage, most likely. Like, it's just not something I'm going to pay attention to. And I think when we've played cEDH on the show, I treat those games completely differently. I do not think about my interaction and my decision tree even remotely the same way, right? I literally want to have the most untapped mana, the most cards in my hand, the most options, and hide what I'm doing the most. So I want to sit back and do the least until I'm ready to win.
Oh, one of the interesting things about like competitive Commander, right, is in multiple 1v1 Magic, your cards trade equally, but in Commander, your cards are trading at a loss. So like there is like this incentive for everyone to kind of just like hang back and try to use this little interaction as possible and be greedy. I also enjoy that too. Like, I enjoy that kind of playstyle of like being greedy, holding things back, forcing my opponents to do things.
Now, kind of going back to what I asked at the beginning, where or kind of was getting to, which is how the cast has always been about modern for fun, and in many ways cEDH is for fun but for competitive. How has that been from a community building perspective? Because you do a lot of community building work, taking the mindset of a format that exists already and then applying it to a different audience.
I think you just have to be willing to drop your head on like a gradient, basically. Like, when I talk to Nathan, who goes like by the Hermit Druid on Twitter, I know he likes playing like decks that are a bit more janky. And so like when I talk to him and I give him card advice, my card advice is more janky. And when I'm in my Discord server where I play most of my games, and someone asks me what my opinion is on a deck, I might say, I don't think that deck's very good. But then if someone asks me like, hey, do you think I should play this deck? I'll be like, oh yeah, I think you'll have fun. And this could be the same deck. So I just think like, it's like, I imagine this is the same way in Modern, right? Like if you're going to your FNM and you're playing Modern or your FNM and you're going to Modern at like a Modern event, like the Modern Pro Tour or something, when that existed, the deck you would bring to those events, not even just from a purely competitive level, the decks you would bring to those events is different. Like if you want to play Blue-Black Mill, you can play Blue-Black Mill. If you want to play, I haven't played Modern in years. So if you want to play like Zoo, you can just play Zoo at the Pro Tour if that's the best deck to play. I think in cEDH is the same way. And so when you're community building, you just have to be willing to like understand from the context clues, like what is the goal of the people I'm communicating with? And that's what Rule Zero is all about. So as a Commander player, you should get familiar with that, I think.
I think one piece of this, it kind of relates to what you and I were just talking about a second ago, Alex, before the show started. And this is obviously not in reference to specifically the idea of using proxies, because I think that's a different conversation, but it's the idea of having an optimal build and the idea of having an optimal set of cards. And so, if you are going to play one game at a time, I think cEDH is a format that makes a lot more sense to not necessarily have to own more than one copy of any of these cards, because in theory, every deck you play is going to want to have the most powerful set of cards in it. And so for EDH, like Alex, you were just saying that like when you build a new deck, primarily you build it like based off of what you have, and like sometimes you'll buy some cards, but like you don't put Mana Crypt in every EDH deck, even though all of them are probably made better by it. But like you're not going to like proxy a Mana Crypt or switch it between decks just so you have a Mana Crypt in every EDH deck, because the point necessarily is not for your deck to be of the highest power level every single time. Is it possible to build a cEDH deck and leave out some of those staples that are just so obviously the most powerful cards? Like, can you have a cEDH deck without Mana Crypt?
Honestly, that's it's going to be a person to person basis, right? Like, I know, for example, on the decklist database, there's a Yuriko deck that doesn't play Mana Crypt. And like, most of the people I talk to would say like that deck should be on Mana Crypt. But it's on the decklist database, and they have an argument for why they think it shouldn't be in there. And I think that's like really the bar for cEDH is like, do you have an argument for like your decision making? Like, I can't I can't tell everyone what is or isn't cEDH, right? As long as you put thought into your deck building and the reason you're making the choices is purely for strategic reasons, I think it's fine. I have a friend who doesn't play Ad Nauseam in any of his black decks because he likes to play control, and he likes to be able to argue that you shouldn't attack him because he isn't on Ad Nauseam. I think that's incorrect. I think Ad Nauseam is just too good to cut, but we just disagree on that, So like, I'm sure there's someone out there who's playing some deck in Modern that they're not playing some staple they're supposed to be playing. They're still playing Modern.
So Ben, how do you feel about coffee?
Dude, I love me some coffee. I mean, the daily coffee walk at the office is like a highlight of my day.
Oh, hashtag same. One thing I have been able to get into a little bit more since this year started is making my own coffee, which is really fun. I have cool devices. I feel like a mad scientist.
Yeah, pour over, you French press. There's so many options with coffee these days. But here's the thing, Alex. If in drinking your coffee you could make a difference in the world, would you?
Of course I would.
Of course you would. So look, we can help starving children with our morning coffee. We're going to talk to you guys right now about a partnership we're working on with Free Lunch Coffee. They're on a mission to end hunger from the lives of young children. So the way this works is that when you buy just one bag of Free Lunch Coffee, you're also providing 10 meals to children in need. One bag of coffee is 10 meals. Free Lunch Coffee gives away 50% of the money they make to end hunger in the lives of young children. Their coffee is specialty grade, it's certified organic, fair trade, and they offer 100% happiness guarantee for 30 days. So if you don't love their coffee, they'll just give you a full refund.
Yeah, and they also have these awesome tumblers and mugs. Who doesn't love collecting different cups to drink out of, especially if you spill a lot like me? They're great. Definitely check them out. They're actually offering through us a 10% discount code. So to our loyal listeners, all y'all friends, if you use the code MMCast at checkout, you'll get 10% off, and they'll know that we sent you. So definitely check them out at freelunchcoffee.com. Make sure to use the code MMCast when you check out. That way you can get 10% off and help a bunch of kids in need, plus get great coffee, because we all drink coffee because you need it to survive, or at least that's me. And you're helping people out now. So check it out, freelunchcoffee.com.